Geometry Chapter 2 test review. This is the last that you have to catch up on. So here we go. Question 1 is find the next two numbers in each pattern. -6, -1, 4, 9, 14. That's simply just an add 5 pattern. Now part B is 32, -16, 8, -4, 2. That's clearly a divide by 2 pattern. Question 2, the number of possible subsets of a set with 2 elements is blank. Well, we remember from quiz 1, if we had 2 elements, there would be 2 squared or 4 possible subsets. If we had 3 elements, there would be 2 to the third or 8 possible elements. Part B, a plane is separated into blank unbounded regions by n parallel lines with planes with that plane. So 2 parallel lines would separate into 3 regions, 3 into 4, 4 into 5, and n unbounded regions would go into n+1 regions. So n would go into n+1. So question 3, given the statement Q, girls have blonde hair, not Q would be girls do not have blonde hair. Upside down AQ, all girls have blonde hair. Backwards EQ, some girls have blonde hair. Not some Q, no girls have blonde hair. And not all Q, some girls do not have blonde hair. Now in 4, we're to make conditionals out of the original statements. If then is a conditional. So for the first statement, the pen writes because it has ink in it, we make the conditional. If a pen has ink, then it writes. And for the second statement, 2 parallel lines never intersect, we make the conditional out of it. If 2 lines are parallel, then they never intersect. Now for 5, we're to figure out whether it's a disjunction, an or a conjunction, an and whether the statement is true or false. So birds fly or fish swim, both parts are true, it's an or, so it's a disjunction and it's true. Blue and orange are primary colors of light. It's a conjunction because it has an and, but orange isn't a primary color, so it's true for the first. Blue is true, but orange is false, so the conjunction is false. And for part C, every pyramid is a cone, which is true, and every prism is a cylinder, which is true. Both parts are true, and it's a conjunction, so it's a conjunction and true. For question 6, our conditional is, if a person is an American, then he likes apple pie. The converse is reading it backwards. No, the inverse rather is doing the negative of each part. If a person is not an American, then he does not like apple pie. The equivalent disjunction is a person is not an American or he likes apple pie. The contrapositive is backwards and negative. If a person does not like apple pie, then he is not an American. The converse is the backward one. If a person likes apple pie, then he is an American. And the biconditional is with an if and only if. A person is an American if and only if he likes apple pie, which includes the forward and the converse backwards, all in one. Now 7 is a series of statements which were to identify each argument or fallacy based on the premises. So for part A, if 2 angles are vertical, then they are congruent. Angle 4 is congruent to angle 6. So the first statement is if P then Q. The angle 4 congruent to angle 6 is the second part of the statement, the Q. And therefore, angle 4 and angle 6 are vertical angles is the first part of the conditional P. So therefore, this is assuming the converse of going in backwards order. So for the first, the conditional if P then Q, if students do well in math, then they like math, then the next premise is not Q, Sally does not do well in math, and the conclusion is not Q, therefore Sally does not like math. This is assuming the inverse, going forward with the negatives. And then the conditional if P then Q is if two angles are right angles, then they are congruent. For the second premise, angle A and angle B are right angles, which is P, the first part, and then therefore angle A is congruent to angle B, Q, the second part. That's one of our valid arguments called modus ponens. And in 8, we're to state whether the reasoning is valid or invalid, whether the premises are true or false, and whether the argument is sound or unsound. So for part A, tigers belong to the wolf family. Tigers are dogs, which is of course a false premise. Therefore, tigers belong to the wolf family. Well, tigers are dogs and tigers belong to the wolf family is a transitive argument, so that's valid reasoning, but a false premise, so it's unsound argument. For part B, all peoples are sinners. I am a person, second premise, therefore I am a sinner. Well, that's a valid argument. The premises are connected to the conclusion. The premises are true, and therefore it's a sound argument. Finishing up question 8, we have part C. Some spiders are poisonous for our first premise. Black widows are spiders, both of which premises are true. Therefore, black widows are poisonous, but the premises don't connect with the conclusion. Therefore, it's invalid reasoning, true premises, and an unsound argument. Now with our figure over here, in order to find angle FGE, we would be complementary with the angle 40. So the measure of FGE is 90 minus 40 equals 50. Now for the angle DGC, we would be vertical with AGF, which would be 40. And for measure of BGD, we would be 90 degrees because that would be supplementary with EGD because they're both right angles. And on 10, we have two angles that are complementary. 4z plus 7z plus 2 equals 90, which gives us 11z plus 2 equals 90, or 11z equals 88, and z equals 8. And that gives us angle GHJ of 4 times 8, or 32, the 4z, and angle JHK of 7, 8 plus 2, or 56 plus 2 is 58, and the 32 plus 58 add to 90. For problem 11, we have two angles that are congruent. The 3x minus 22 is equal to the 2x minus 5. Solving for x, subtracting 2x, we get x minus 22 equals negative 5, and adding 22, we get x is 17. So angle TUW, the 2x minus 5, is 2 times 17 minus 5, or 34 minus 5 is 29, and measure TUV is twice of 29, or 58. Now problem 12 is to find x, y, and yz, where y is the midpoint of segment xz. So the two parts are equal. 3a minus 1 equals 2a plus 21. Subtract 2a. A minus 1 equals 21. A equals 22. And yz equals 3 times 22 minus 1, or 65. And xz is 2 times 65, or 130. Problem 13 is find the coordinate of u if t is the midpoint of segment SU and the coordinate of S is 148, as shown in the diagram. So the midpoint of SU is 148 plus u over 2 is equal to 47. So multiplying both sides by 2, we get 148 plus u equals 2 times 47, or 148 plus u equals 94. Subtracting 94, we get u equals minus 54. Now in 14, we're to identify the property. So 7 times 1 equals 7 is the identity property for multiplication. Parentheses 3 times 5 times 4 equals 3 times parentheses 5 times 4 is the associative for 3 terms for multiplication. 6 plus 9 equals 9 plus 6 is commutative for addition. Segment AB is congruent to segment AB is reflexive. And if 6 equals x and x equals 6 is symmetric. So that's those. Now in 15, we're to identify the theorems and definitions. So for part A, the midpoint theorem, if m is the midpoint of xy as shown in the picture, then xm equals 1/2 xy. For the definition of congruent segments, if segment PQ is congruent to segment RS, then length PQ is equal to length RS. For the definition of between, if TU plus UV equals TV, then T-U-V means U is between T and V. And the linear pair theorem, if angle 1 and angle 2 form a linear pair as shown in the picture, then they are supplementary. And then for 16, we have the vertical angle theorem. If angle 1 and angle 5 are vertical angles, then angle 1 is congruent to angle 5. Definition of supplementary, measure of P plus measure of Q is equal to 180. Definition of congruent angles, if measure E is equal to measure of angle F, then angle E is congruent to angle F. Transitive property of congruent segments, if AB is congruent to CD and CD is congruent to EF, then AB is congruent to EF. An angle addition postulate, the measure of angle JHK plus the measure of angle HKL, where H is shared there, is equal to the measure of JKL. Now the next 3 are simple proofs. Given LM equals PQ from the diagram, prove that LP is equal to segment MQ. So statements and reasons. Statement 1, segment LM is congruent to segment PQ given. Length LM is equal to length PQ, definition of congruent segments. LM plus MP equals MP plus PQ, adding MP to both sides, addition property of equality. LM plus MP equals LP, and MP plus PQ equals MQ is our definition of between. LP equals MQ, substitution. They're both equal from the statements above. And segment LP is congruent to segment MQ, definition of congruent segments. Now for 18, this is an algebraic reasoning proof. Prove if negative 3 parentheses 3x plus 6, then x equals negative 2. So statements, negative 3 parentheses x plus 6 equals 6x given. Negative 3x minus 18 equals 6x, distributive property. Then adding 3x to both sides. Negative 18 equals 9x, the addition property of equality. Dividing both sides by 9 is it gives us negative 2 equals x by the multiplication property of equality. And then x equals negative 2, the symmetric property of equality. And then the last proof, given our picture, given angle APC is congruent to BPD, prove angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. So statements and reasons. Angle APC is congruent to angle BPD given. The measure of angle APC is equal to the measure of angle BPD. Definition of congruent angles. Measure of APC is equal to measure 1 plus measure 2. And the measure of BPD is equal to measure 2 plus measure 3 comes from the angle addition postulate. Measure 1 plus measure 2 is equal to measure 2 plus measure 3, substitution from the above statement. And therefore, subtracting measure 2 from both sides, Measure 1 is equal to measure 3, addition property of equality, and therefore angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, which we set out to prove. Definition of congruent angles. So this finishes up the test. We're not going to do problem 20, Landon, because it's just too hard. So get this done in a week, like we said, and you have a good weekend. God bless you, buddy.